Like
okay, where are we going?
We're gonna go up the stairs. So, here, let me help you once you get around this corner. Can I take this guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's books. I got books.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Okay, so you get first choice on your room.
Oh.
Let me show you. We'll just leave your stuff here for a moment so you can like look around. Let's
First choice.
Yeah, and I think there'll only be 2 people in this room.
Wow. This just looks really good, you know?
It's a lot of texture. So I will say that at this moment, this side of the building is cooler, but in the morning, so the sun rises over here and sets over there. So it depends on, I guess, your poison in terms of heat.
Oh wait, that's someone's living there.
Those are the interns living there. So.
It's so good.
Yeah, so you don't have to choose right now. Clearly, no one else is here yet, but
Yeah.
so I'll let you ponder on it. There's some options.
The history is embedded in this place. It is an archive and a time capsule of 60 years of this town and also 60 years of like America. And rather than like sell this stuff or get rid of it or put it away or turn it into a stale museum, we're actually going to invite some of the most creative, critical, engaged minds of our generation to come in and use these things to make works that become publicly available and interactive and engaged, and at the same time rethink what the museum can be in the 21st century. That was kind of our goal. That was kind of our idea, is to let this space speak through a process of continued arrangements and rearrangements. To assume that the page already is filled with words, it's just a matter of putting them in order. Myself and Stephanie came down to Greensboro, actually for a concert. But the next morning, I was like, you gotta check out my grandmother's old store. It's been locked up for 6 years and no one knows what to do with it, so what if we were to come down here and move into the store and decide that nothing would be for sale and nothing would leave, and instead treat it like this massive puzzle or this sort of singular set, this archive.
Annie did this. It was actually a 13-hour endurance. He held this tower for 13 hours. And he stood on this glass here.
He held it?
Yeah, he held it at a, it was leaning like this. So he was basically, it was symbolic of our organization, which has been around for 13 years. And he listened to that while he held it for 13 hours. And he didn't take any snack breaks. He didn't eat. He didn't use the bathroom. He literally just stood here. And when he started, this glass was whole, and then over the 13 hours, it all just like kind of disintegrated into these like tiny shards. So we're kind of trying to decide the next steps for the installation because it was mostly performance based.
Yeah. When I walked in for the first time, I was just blown away. I thought it was so beautiful. I had no idea of how big this place would be. Kept being met by different people, just going, hey, welcome, it's great to have you. And they were cooking up some delicious food. So like straight away, there's a great sense of community and enthusiasm.
I read about it as this living museum, and my first impression was, oh, I can just delve in and use the materials as I see fit. And then you come here and you realize that there's an order to the madness embedded in this object. Is a particular time period, a certain set of associations and meanings that I may have, but also those who've grown up in the South may have a stronger or different set of associations and meanings. But understanding that it feels like layering time on top of itself.
You have these high-profile shootings that happen in a span of 3 or 4 days, right?
Yeah.
I get a call from George Shear, the founder of Elsewhere, who was seeing some of the stuff I was posting in response to that, and he said, hey, if you want to use your time here to kind of deal with these issues, Elsewhere will support you.
The idea of a collection comes from the idea that this is a museum, or that it's a store where nothing's for sale that became a museum.
This is the postmodern museum.
It is certainly a reflection and a deconstruction of the concept of a museum. First off, that museums frame works on white walls. Like every artist that's reinstalling another artist's work or is transforming the rooms, they're like constantly responding to all these other conditions. They're having to work with all these other materials. Like there's no like clear it out, move it, put it in a box, push it away.
And elsewhere, I am filling this room with mirrors. And then I'm going to put in a 4-channel surround sound music piece, and then I'm going to fill it with LEDs from the top. So hopefully then the LEDs will reflect. But aesthetically, the place looks great where it is right now. Because the thought of moving all the mirrors was painful. But I think the thought of working in here was painful because there's just so much dangerous glass everywhere. But I'm doing it.
You were drawn to the shiniest, most dangerous room.
For sure.
It's cool thinking of this place as like a world, or like an ecosystem. Like we only have the resources we have and you have to use them wisely. And I mean, the space issue has been really kind of weird and crazy here. Everything's like piling up everywhere and there's dust everywhere and it's a little overwhelming, but like kind of an adventure at the same time. It's different from other residencies where you really just get like an empty room and you're just supposed to do your work, right? I mean, there's a lot of interesting demands of this space, and we had to come up with concepts really quickly, which was pretty overwhelming.
My name is Emily Ensminger. I am the program curator at Elsewhere Museum. I do think that I'm starting to understand that everyone's process is really, really different. I'm starting to understand that, comfort doesn't always benefit somebody. To make sure that they are comfortable and they feel supported, but they're still being challenged, and that we're not just producing work for them. Mm-hmm. Those things matter to me. Elsewhere can be a really challenging space, and it's more and more challenging the more you try to resist it.
My grandmother Sylvia and her husband Joe ran a store in downtown Greensboro from 1939 till 1997. For me it was like an adventure. So I'd come here and I'd help like sell things, and then I'd like scurry in the back and just dig through boxes for hours and hours. But it always felt like a place where I was much more interested in finding things and toys and playing with them and then hiding them again so I could find them again. It was like that, that box you might have in your grandmother's house that's like the box of toys.
Yeah.
It was an entire building full of that. But it was also like this place you would just sort of creep through, and like, as soon as you pulled one thing out, there would be a million other things that you just start pulling out, right? So what we have now in this very orderly fashion where you can walk around and move and like really comfortable in a way, there it was like you couldn't even sit down. Then my grandfather passed suddenly of a heart attack. The Army surplus business sort of came to an end. Eventually, over time, she began getting into just general thrift. Just more and more things were being accumulated. She'd cut buttons off of clothes and put them in jars. She would, really, I think everything had a certain value to her. She grew up in the Depression. I think she really remembered having had nothing.
There's something about the process of finding your materials or actually letting them, like, I actually kind of believe that they find you, that makes the whole sort of artistic process special and magical, and I can't help but keep them around. So it's kind of interesting being here at Elsewhere because I'm like kind of right at home, but it's also like someone else's stuff, so I feel kind of like weird. I'm attracted to things that other people consider trash, but I think mostly, kind of aesthetically, like I'm just sort of addicted to like foraging, like hunting for things. It's weird. It's weird having to kind of clean as you go also, like you're like, oh, I want to work in this area. Oh my God, it's covered in dust. Or there's baby dolls everywhere, or there's broken glass, and you have to find a place to put it. Like you're not, you're building on past people's projects, and everything here is important. And I really like that conceptually. I like this idea of the collection in a living space, like the objects in the space are living and breathing.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is the title of the piece. I imagine you coming in and seeing this armoire that is stacked to the brim with all these dishes that are just shaking and shaking, with the rumbling of audio that, because the speaker has been deconstructed and is facing in on the armoire, it's like this muffled conversation that's going on. I want you to get this sense of the building anticipation of the arrival of somebody. Yeah, I'm very comfortable with all the artists coming in and building upon it. I feel like, in keeping with the concept of it, I'm opening it up to be destroyed and reassembled into something new. Because you have to allow a certain self to die in order for a new self to be born.
When I was a kid, my dad worked at Burlington. It was a textile factory, which moved overseas. And my mom worked at Converse, where they made the shoes, which moved overseas as well. So you realize that like race is a huge issue that doesn't get talked about enough. However, like class is like a really big deal, right? So when I first started like making artwork, right, it was all about race. So when I would talk to people with like white students who pretty much had area advantage in life, but I'm like, you're not that smart. or not even that, like, you're not that smart. You're no smarter than my cousin who sells drugs. I have essentially right now like 3 ways that I make work, right? So I make paintings, I do wheat paste installation, and I make found object sculptures. So I'm taking this room that is 10 by 10 by 4.5 feet, and it's becoming a microcosm of one of these communities that are affected by the war on drugs and mass incarceration.
And if we can change the kind of embedded cultures that do exist here, the certain conservatism that exists here, the racism that exists here, if we can address the histories that the South has around class and race, it will have an immense effect on all the other places.
Living in these big cities, it's hard to feel like you actually can affect the environment. Why does it even care about you? What are you doing for it? But it's really nice that you can help improve this place and grow this place and become part of it. You can't always do something original. You can't even worry about it. The context is always new. You're always working in a specific context.
Like when this really becomes this like centerpiece and home for like some of the most amazing critical creative thinkers, and this becomes a dock for them, a hub for them, right? Not an isolated moment of a movement that happens in Paris and then disappears over time, but actually like a sustained space where people continue to like connect through. That to me is the excitement of the next 40 years. And that's what Elsewhere needs to be doing. That's what Elsewhere does. I was just giving a tour to this woman today, and she came into the space. We went through all 3 floors, and when she came back down and walked out onto the street, she was like, oh, and the world is here. Right? And it was that moment of having gone through the entire building, room by room, all these moments that are all just like flashes as you pass through so many different spaces compressed, and so many different objects that at every moment it's like that's from the 80s, that's from the 60s, that's from the 70s, that's from the 90s. At every moment you're seeing time compressed and you're seeing everything present all at once and configured in unique ways that by the time you walk out of the space and you step back onto the street, it suddenly becomes strange. The world becomes strange.